I need to write this down, not just for myself but in case someone stumbles across it later. Maybe someone will believe me. Maybe someone can help. Or, at the very least, if something happens to me, if I disappear, there will be a record of what went on. My name is Michael Brennan. I'm 42 years old. Until recently, I had what you'd call a pretty ordinary life. I was living in Charleston, West Virginia, in a small apartment that was just enough for me and my cat, Pixel. I worked in IT for a large tech company, a steady but unremarkable job that paid the bills and kept me busy. My days revolved around routine, working long hours fixing network issues, grabbing takeout, watching a little TV, and winding down with Pixel curled up beside me. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was mine, and it was stable. That all changed a few months ago. My quiet, uneventful life came crashing down because of something I found, something I wasn't supposed to see. It happened during a routine server audit. I came across a series of encrypted files buried deep in the company's data network. At first, I thought it was nothing more than sloppy file management. But curiosity got the better of me. I decrypted the files, expecting to find old project records or maybe some misfiled documents. What I uncovered, though, was so much worse. The files contained evidence of illegal activity, things the company was doing with user data that I could barely wrap my head around. Personal information was being collected, shared, and sold in ways that violated every ethical standard I knew. It wasn't just about violating privacy. This was the kind of thing that could destroy lives if it ever got out. I spent hours poring over the files, my stomach twisting into knots as I realized the scale of what I was looking at. I couldn't just ignore it. I made a decision that night, a decision that I thought was the right one. I became a whistleblower. I reported everything to an external watchdog organization, ensuring the information reached people who could do something about it. What I didn't anticipate was the backlash. Within a week, I was fired. Not only fired but effectively blacklisted. My name was out there, flagged as trouble, and no tech company in the state wanted anything to do with me. I applied for dozens of jobs, but every interview ended the same way, with polite excuses and doors closing in my face. My savings dwindled faster than I thought possible. Rent fell behind, bills piled up, and I found myself staring down the very real threat of eviction. Desperation drove me to places I never thought I'd go. I scoured job boards for anything that could keep the lights on. That's when I saw it. Night receptionist needed. Whispering Pines Motel, Ville, WV. $50 per hour. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. No experience necessary. Immediate start ****. The ad felt like a lifeline, even if it seemed too good to be true. $50 an hour for an unskilled night job? That kind of money didn't come easy, especially for someone in my situation. But I couldn't afford to question it. I was out of options. I called the number listed. The voice on the other end was rough and to the point. "Come in tonight," the man said. "No resume needed. Interview at 11. Then he hung up. The drive to Ville was uneventful but eerie. It was late evening, and the highway was nearly deserted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. I tried to brush it off as nerves. After all, I'd never worked a job like this before, and the circumstances weren't exactly ideal. When I pulled up to Whispering Pines Motel, the first thing I noticed was how rundown it looked. The motel was an old L-shaped building, the kind you'd see in low-budget horror movies. The 2 stories of rooms were arranged around a central parking lot, and the neon sign out front was barely hanging on to life, with half the letters flickering or burnt out completely. I parked near the office and took a moment to steady myself. "It's just a job," I muttered under my breath. "Nothing weird. Just get through the night." The office door jingled as I pushed it open. The smell hit me first, a mix of stale cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener. Behind the desk sat an old man with weathered features, his face a map of wrinkles and sunspots. He was hunched over a newspaper, not bothering to look up when I walked in. Help you? He grunted. I cleared my throat. Yeah, I'm Michael Brennan. I called about the night receptionist job. He finally looked up, his eyes sharp and assessing. You sure you want it? The question threw me. Yeah. That's why I'm here. He nodded slowly. All right, you start tonight. 11 to 7. $50 an hour. Got any questions? I hesitated, caught off guard by how abrupt the conversation was. Don't you want to, I don't know, interview me? He shrugged as if the idea was absurd. You showed up. That's all the interview I need. Job ain't for everyone. The pay was too good to argue with. Okay, great. So, what do I need to do? Check in guests. Keep an eye on things. And follow the rules. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it out to me. Memorize these. Don't write them down. Don't tell anyone about them. Break a rule, and you're done. Got it? I took the paper, my hands trembling slightly. Got it? Good. See you at 11. He left before I could ask anything else, leaving me alone with the paper. Once I was back in my car, I unfolded it and read the rules. Rules for the night shift at Whispering Pines Motel *. 1. At 11:15 p.m., turn off the neon sign. Turn it back on at 6:45 a.m. No earlier, no later. 2. If you hear knocking from inside the ice machine, ignore it. Never open the ice machine between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. 3. Room 237 is always vacant. If someone asks about it, say it's under renovation. If you see lights on in room 237, do not investigate. 4. The phone in the office will ring at 3:33 a.m. every night. Answer it, but don't speak. Listen for exactly 66 seconds, then hang up. 5. If a guest checks in and says their name is John Smith, give them the key to room 113, no matter what. Don't look at their face. 6. The vending machine may dispense items that aren't food or drinks. If this happens, dispose of the item immediately. Don't touch it with bare hands. 7. At 5:55 a.m., lock yourself in the supply closet for exactly 5 minutes. Do not come out early, no matter what you hear. I read the list twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of it. It had to be a joke. A weird initiation ritual for new hires. But there was something about the old man's demeanor, something in his eyes, that made me feel like he was deadly serious. I glanced at my watch. It was 10:45 p.m. I had 15 minutes to decide whether I was going through with this. Images of Pixel flashed in my mind, along with the eviction notice sitting on my kitchen counter. Taking a deep breath, I made up my mind. I wasn't ready for what was waiting for me that night. At exactly 11 p.m., I entered the office. The old man was gone, replaced by someone else. This guy was younger, probably in his 30s, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept properly in days. He barely glanced at me as I walked in. "You the new guy?" he asked, already standing up and gathering his belongings. "Yeah, I'm Michael," I replied. He grunted in acknowledgement, slinging a worn backpack over his shoulder. "Good luck," he muttered as he brushed past me toward the door. "Wait," I called after him, desperate for any advice or reassurance. "Any tips?" He paused but didn't turn around. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Follow the rules." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the dimly lit office. I took a deep breath and sat down behind the desk. The chair was old, creaky, and lumpy, the kind that seemed like it would swallow you whole if you leaned back too far. I set my phone on the desk, checking the time obsessively as the minutes crept toward 11:15. I kept glancing at the folded list of rules in my pocket, mentally rehearsing each one. Rule number 1 was first, turn off the neon sign at 11:15 p.m. sharp. Easy enough, I thought, though the tension in my chest suggested otherwise. At exactly 11:15, I stepped outside. The air was cold and still, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. I found the switch for the neon sign on the side of the office building and flipped it off. The parking lot plunged into near total darkness, save for a few dim lamps near the room doors. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I thought I saw something move in the shadows near room 237. My heart skipped a beat, but when I looked directly at the spot, there was nothing there. Just my imagination, I told myself, though the uneasy feeling lingered. Back inside the office, I tried to settle in. The space was small and cramped, with a desk, an ancient computer, a filing cabinet, and a few shelves cluttered with random supplies. A door at the back led to a tiny bathroom, a supply closet, and a cramped break room with a cot and a mini fridge. The idea of sleeping here, surrounded by the oppressive atmosphere of the motel, made my skin crawl. I spent the next hour alternating between scrolling through my phone and glancing at the clock. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. I jumped at every little noise, my nerves on edge. At 1:30 a.m., the first guests of the night arrived. A car pulled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. A young couple, probably in their mid-20s, stepped out, giggling and leaning on each other. They seemed carefree, almost oblivious to the eerie vibe of the place. "Welcome to Whispering Pines," I said, forcing a smile as they approached the desk. "How can I help you?" The guy grinned. "Yeah, we need a room for the night. Something with a view, you know?" He winked exaggeratedly, making his girlfriend laugh. I chuckled politely. "Sure thing. I've got a room on the second floor that should work." I grabbed the key for room 215 from the pegboard behind me. "That'll be $65 for the night." As I processed their payment, the girl glanced around, her smile fading. "This place is kind of creepy," she said, her voice hesitant. "Babe, maybe we should go somewhere else." My breath caught. If they left, it might look bad on me. I couldn't afford to lose this job. The guy laughed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Nah, come on. It's got character. Besides, I'm sure it looks better in the daylight, right?" He looked at me expectantly. "Oh, absolutely," I lied smoothly. "The view of the mountains in the morning is breathtaking. You'll love it." That seemed to reassure her, and they headed off to their room. I let out a sigh of relief. One normal interaction down. Maybe this job wouldn't be so bad after all. But I'd spoken too soon. At 2:17 a.m., I heard it, the soft thumping sound. My stomach dropped as I realized it was coming from the ice machine in the lobby. At first, the noise was gentle, like someone tapping politely. But it grew louder, more insistent. I froze, my blood running cold as the rules echoed in my mind. If you hear knocking from inside the ice machine, ignore it. Do not open the ice machine between 2 a.m. and 4:00 a.m. ***. The thumping escalated, turning into frantic pounding. It didn't sound like knocking anymore. It sounded like something trying to claw its way out. My heart raced, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away as possible. Then came the voice. It was muffled, distorted, but unmistakably human. Someone, or something, was inside, crying out in desperation. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, almost begging. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "It's not real," I muttered under my breath. "It's not real, it's not real." The noise continued for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Finally it stopped. The sudden silence was almost more unnerving than the pounding had been. I slowly lowered my hands, my ears ringing in the quiet. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my hands were trembling. I glanced at the clock, 2:43 a.m. There was still over an hour to go before the ice machine would be safe again. Desperate for a distraction, I turned to the computer on the desk. It was ancient, with a monitor that looked like it belonged in the early 2000s. I jiggled the mouse, hoping to lose myself in some mindless internet browsing, but the screen didn't turn on. Leaning closer, I realized the monitor wasn't just off, it was cracked. A spider web of fractures spread across the glass, and there was a dark, sticky smear on the keyboard. My stomach turned as I realized it looked like blood, old, congealed, and dried. Before I could process what I was seeing, the phone rang. I jumped, the sharp sound slicing through the silence like a knife. I glanced at the clock, 3:33 a.m. Exactly. With a trembling hand, I picked up the receiver. The rule echoed in my mind: answer the phone, but do not speak. Listen for exactly 66 seconds, then hang up ***. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart pounding. At first, there was only static. Then, faintly, I began to hear sounds beneath the white noise. Whispers, too quiet to understand, but undeniably there. The static faded, replaced by what sounded like footsteps on creaky floorboards. Then, a voice. It was low and menacing, as though the speaker was right behind me. "We've been waiting for you, Michael." The voice on the phone sent shivers down my spine. It was too clear, too close, as if someone was standing right beside me. "We've been waiting for you, Michael," it said, slow and deliberate. My breath hitched. How did they know my name? My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles whitening. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but the rules were clear. Do not speak. The voice continued, growing colder and more unsettling. "Did you really think you could escape? That you could just forget?" It laughed, a low, chilling sound that made my skin crawl. "You have so much to remember, Michael. So much to pay for." And then, just like that, the line went dead. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. What did that mean? Escape from what? Forget what? I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing. Was this all part of some elaborate prank? A cruel initiation for new hires? But deep down, I knew better. This was something far worse. I stumbled to the bathroom, needing a moment to collect myself. Splashing cold water on my face, I tried to calm my racing thoughts. But when I looked up at the mirror, I froze. 2 words were written in the steam that shouldn't have been there in the ice-cold room. "Remember, Michael." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. The words lingered on the glass, mocking me, refusing to fade. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. I stayed in the bathroom longer than I should have, too shaken to face whatever was waiting for me outside. But the sound of a car pulling into the lot jolted me back to reality. It was 4:30 a.m. I peeked out of the office window and saw a man stepping out of a beat-up sedan. He looked ordinary enough, middle-aged, wearing a rumpled jacket, but as he approached the office, I felt a knot of unease tighten in my chest. He opened the door, and the bell jingled softly. "Good evening," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "I need a room." I forced a smile, reaching for the keys behind me. "Of course. Just for you?" He nodded, his movements stiff and deliberate. As I processed his payment, I noticed his hands. They were covered in a dark, oily substance that shimmered oddly under the fluorescent light. It wasn't grease or motor oil. It looked thicker, almost alive. "Car trouble?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He glanced at his hands, then quickly shoved them into his jacket pockets. "Something like that," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. I handed him the key to room 109, careful not to let our fingers touch. As he turned to leave, I caught a whiff of something strange, an acrid, chemical smell with a sickly sweet undertone. It made my stomach churn. Once he was gone, I found myself obsessively washing my hands, as if I'd somehow been contaminated just by being near him. The next hour passed in a blur of nervous energy. I tried to keep myself busy, organizing the clutter on the desk and flipping through an old magazine. But my mind kept drifting back to the strange man, the voice on the phone, and the words in the mirror. At 5:55 a.m., I checked my watch, my heart pounding. It was time for Rule 7. Lock yourself in the supply closet for exactly 5 minutes. Do not come out early, no matter what you hear ***. I didn't know what to expect, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't taking any chances. I grabbed the keys and hurried to the closet, locking the door behind me as the clock struck 5:55. For the first minute, nothing happened. The air was still and heavy, the only sound my own breathing. Then I heard it, a low guttural growl, so deep it felt like it vibrated through the walls. My breath caught in my throat. The growling grew louder, accompanied by the sound of something heavy slamming against the door. The whole closet shook with each impact, and I pressed myself into the corner, biting my fist to keep from screaming. The door handle rattled violently, as if whatever was outside was trying to force its way in. My watch said 5:58, but it felt like an eternity had passed. I squeezed my eyes shut, silently begging the clock to move faster. At exactly 6 a.m., the noises stopped. The silence was deafening, but I didn't dare move until my watch ticked over to 6:01. When I finally stepped out of the closet, the hallway was empty. There was no sign of whatever had been trying to get in. I turned the neon sign back on at 6:45, as instructed, and waited for the old man to return. He arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, as if nothing unusual had happened. He looked me up and down, taking in my disheveled appearance and wild eyes. "You made it," he said gruffly. "Want to quit?" The word yes was on the tip of my tongue, but then I thought of my empty bank account, the eviction notice, and Pixel waiting for me at home. "No," I said finally. "I'll be back tonight." He nodded, unsurprised. "See you at 11, then." As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "Good job, Michael. You're remembering. See you soon ***. The words sent a chill down my spine. Who was watching me? How did they know my name? I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. When I got to my apartment, Pixel greeted me at the door, meowing for breakfast. The sight of her was a small comfort, a reminder that there was still some normalcy left in my life. But as I poured her food, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the counter, closing my eyes as strange images flashed through my mind. A stark white room, the smell of antiseptic, a man in a lab coat leaning over me, saying something about successful memory suppression. I gasped, my eyes snapping open. What was that? A dream? A hallucination? Or something I had forgotten? Pixel rubbed against my leg, purring softly, oblivious to the chaos in my mind. I sank to the floor, stroking her fur as the pieces of the puzzle refused to come together. Whispering Pines wasn't just a strange job, it was connected to me, to my past. And if I wanted answers, I'd have to go back. I spent most of the day in a fog, caught between exhaustion and the weight of questions that had no answers. Sleep came in brief, restless intervals, interrupted by flashes of unsettling images I couldn't fully grasp. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw fragments of that stark white room, the harsh fluorescent lights, the faint chemical smell of antiseptic, and the sound of murmured voices just out of reach. By the time the afternoon sun began to fade, I gave up on sleep entirely. Instead, I turned to my laptop, determined to find some kind of explanation for the bizarre events at Whispering Pines. My first search was for the motel itself. I scoured forums, maps, and review sites, but it was as if the place didn't exist. There were no listings, no mentions in travel guides, not even a stray Yelp review. The only thing I found were vague posts from locals describing weird vibes in that part of town. A few mentioned odd occurrences, a disappearing hitchhiker, strange lights in the woods, but nothing that tied directly to the motel. Frustrated, I turned my attention to my own past. If the voice on the phone was right, if there really was something I was supposed to remember, I needed to figure out what it was. But the harder I tried to piece things together, the more fragmented my memories felt. There was a gap in my mind, a stretch of time that seemed blurred, like an old photograph left out in the sun too long. The only concrete memory I could cling to was the decision that led me to Charleston years ago. I had moved there to escape something, but the details were hazy. It was like trying to grasp smoke. The more I reached for it, the faster it slipped through my fingers. By the time the clock crept toward 10:30 p.m., I had more questions than when I started. The only thing I knew for certain was that I had to go back. If I didn't, the weight of those unanswered questions would crush me. The drive to Whispering Pines felt different this time. The road was darker, the shadows stretching farther than they should have. The hum of my car engine did little to drown out the uneasy thoughts swirling in my mind. When I pulled into the lot, the old man was already waiting in the office, sitting in the same spot with the same crumpled newspaper. He barely looked up as I walked in. "You're early," he grunted. I nodded, too drained to respond. He folded his paper and fixed me with that same piercing stare. "Listen, boy," he said, his tone unusually serious. "You made it through one night. That's more than most. But it gets worse from here. You sure you want to stay?" I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat almost too much to speak around. "I need the money," I said weakly. He shook his head, muttering under his breath. "Money ain't worth your soul, kid. But it's your choice." He stood, grabbing his coat. "Oh, and one more thing, there's a new rule tonight. Check the drawer." With that, he walked out, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of the office. I hesitated before opening the drawer, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single slip of paper with a new rule written in the same uneven handwriting as the others. Rule 8. If you see a little girl in a white dress, do not let her in. No matter what she says or does, do not open the door ****. I read it 3 times, my unease growing with each pass. Who is she? Why couldn't I let her in? The simplicity of the rule only made it more unsettling. The first few hours of the shift were uneventful, though the oppressive silence felt heavier than the night before. No guest checked in, and the minutes dragged by, each one stretching into what felt like hours. At 1:22 a.m., I found myself standing in front of the vending machine. The rule from the previous night was still fresh in my mind. Press B5 twice, then C3 once, and place whatever came out under the pillow in the back room. I hesitated for a moment, but the fear of breaking the rules was stronger than my reluctance. I pressed the buttons in the correct sequence, and the machine hummed to life. Instead of the usual clunk of a snack dropping, there was a soft whooshing sound. Something fell into the dispenser tray, but I kept my eyes averted, remembering the rule not to look. Reaching in blindly, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. It felt intricately engraved, the texture rough against my fingertips. I hurried to the back room, slipping the object under the pillow on the cot without looking at it. As soon as I let go, I heard it, a faint whisper, too quiet to understand but unmistakably there. I practically ran back to the desk, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking and my heart raced, but I didn't dare go back to investigate. The 3:33 a.m. phone call came right on schedule. This time, instead of static or whispers, I heard the steady hum of what sounded like an old film projector. Then a voice, cold, clinical, and detached. Subject MB continues to resist memory suppression. Recommend increasing dosage and moving to more aggressive reconditioning techniques. The line went dead. Michael Brennan. They were talking about me. I sat there, frozen, the implications of the words sinking in. Memory suppression? Reconditioning? It sounded like something out of a dystopian novel, not something that could happen in real life. But the flashes I'd been experiencing, the gaps in my memory, suddenly made a horrifying kind of sense. Before I could process what I'd just heard, there was a soft tapping at the office door. I turned slowly, dread settling over me like a heavy blanket. Through the glass, I saw her, a little girl in a white dress, clutching a worn teddy bear. Her dark hair was neatly braided, and she looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Please," she called softly, her voice muffled through the glass. "Please let me in. I'm lost. I'm scared." My heart twisted. Every instinct screamed at me to help her, but the rule echoed in my mind. Do not let her in, no matter what she says or does. "I'm sorry," I called back, my voice shaking. "I can't open the door. It's against the rules." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But I'm cold," she whimpered. "There's something out here. Something bad. Please, mister. Please help me." I gripped the arms of my chair, my knuckles turning white. "I'm sorry," I repeated, feeling like a monster. "I can't." Her expression changed in an instant. The tears vanished, replaced by a look of pure malice. Her voice deepened, layered with something ancient and hateful. "You'll regret this, Michael Brennan," she hissed. "You can't hide from what you've done. We'll make you remember. We'll make you pay." And then she was gone. One moment she was there, pressing her hands against the glass. The next, she vanished into thin air. I sat frozen, my mind reeling. What had I done? What did she mean by "make you remember"? The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear and confusion. I followed the remaining rules mechanically, barely registering what I was doing. When the old man returned at 7 a.m., he took one look at me and shook his head. "The walls are thinning," he said cryptically. "Be careful, boy. Once you start opening doors, it's hard to close them again." I didn't have the energy to ask what he meant. As I left, my phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. 2 down. 5 to go. The past always catches up, Michael ***. The third night began much like the others, though this time, the dread felt heavier. I spent the day trying to piece together everything that had happened so far, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The text messages, the rules, the strange occurrences, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite assemble. And yet, somewhere deep down, I knew there was a connection between Whispering Pines and the fragmented memories that had been haunting me. After feeding Pixel and double-checking my locks, I set out for the motel. The drive was uneventful, but the closer I got to Phil, the darker the road seemed to become. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the familiar sense of unease had settled into my bones. The old man wasn't in the office this time. The space was eerily empty, though the faint smell of stale cigarettes and air fresheners still lingered. I glanced around, half expecting him to appear from some hidden corner, but he was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was another note in the drawer, written in the same uneven handwriting as before. Rule 9. At exactly 2:23 a.m., go to the vending machine and press B5 twice, then C3 once. Take whatever comes out and place it under your pillow in the back room. Do not look at it ***. I read the note 3 times, feeling the weight of its simplicity. The vending machine rule again. What was the significance of these objects? Why did they have to be placed under the pillow? The first few hours of the shift passed without incident. No guest checked in, and the office was deathly quiet, save for the occasional creak of the building settling. But as the clock ticked closer to 2:23 a.m., I felt the tension in the air begin to thicken. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if the motel itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. When the time came, I approached the vending machine with trepidation. My hands trembled as I pressed the buttons in the correct sequence. B5, B5, C3. The machine hummed softly, and then something dropped into the dispenser tray. I averted my eyes, reaching in blindly to retrieve the item. It was small and cold, the metallic surface etched with intricate engravings. Though I couldn't see it, I could feel the weight of its significance, as if it were more than just an object. Carrying it carefully, I made my way to the back room. The cot looked as uninviting as ever, but I placed the object under the pillow as instructed. As soon as I let go, I heard the whispers again. This time, they were louder, more distinct, though I still couldn't make out the words. The air in the room grew colder, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I backed out of the room quickly, shutting the door behind me. The 3:33 a.m. phone call came next, right on schedule. This time, the voice on the other end was the same clinical tone I'd heard the night before. Subject MB has shown increased resistance to memory suppression. Proceeding to stage 3. Additional monitoring required. The line went dead, leaving me more confused than ever. Stage 3? Monitoring? Who were these people, and what had they done to me? I barely had time to process the call before the sound of footsteps outside the office drew my attention. I looked up just in time to see a figure walk past the window, heading toward room 237. It was the man from the previous night, the one with the oily hands and strange chemical smell. He moved with purpose, pulling something from his pocket as he approached the door to room 237. Against every instinct, I followed. He didn't seem to notice me as I trailed him at a distance. When he reached the door, he pulled out what looked like a key, though it was unlike any key I'd ever seen. It was long and metallic, with strange, intricate ridges that glowed faintly in the dark. The key fit perfectly into the lock, and I heard a series of clicks and whirs as the door swung open. What I saw inside defied explanation. The room was impossibly large, far bigger than it could have been based on the motel's exterior. It looked like some kind of laboratory, with walls lined with computers and strange, pulsing machines. The air was filled with a low hum, like the sound of electricity coursing through a live wire. In the center of the room was a chair, no, a throne. It was covered in wires and blinking lights, and strapped to the chair was me. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. How could I be there? I was standing outside the room, watching. And yet, there I was, strapped to the chair, my face pale and lifeless. The man turned suddenly, his face twisting into a snarl as he noticed me. "You shouldn't be here," he growled, his voice low and menacing. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run. I didn't stop until I was back in the office, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart was racing, and my breaths came in short, ragged gasps. What had I just seen? Was it real? A hallucination? The rest of the night passed in a haze. I followed the rules mechanically, barely registering the passage of time. At 5:55 a.m., I locked myself in the supply closet as instructed. The growling and banging from the previous night returned, but I was too numb to feel fear. When the old man arrived at 7 a.m., he took one look at me and sighed. "You saw something you shouldn't have," he said quietly. "The walls between worlds are thin here, boy. Be careful. Once you open a door, it's hard to close it." He didn't wait for a response, turning and walking out of the office without another word. When I got home, there was an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed me strapped to the chair in room 237, my eyes wide with terror. On the back, written in red ink, were the words, "The experiment isn't over, Michael. It's just beginning ****. I sank to the floor, clutching the photo in trembling hands. Whatever was happening at Whispering Pines, it wasn't just about the motel. It was about me. And the worst part? I didn't know if I'd ever escape.